It's a pleasure to be here, after a very long 3 years. I mean, I said this already yesterday, but not everyone was here yesterday. I'm very happy to be back. First time after my PhD defense in Warsaw at GSSR. And thanks to you, and thanks to NAWA for the support, right, for this seminar. So without much other introductions, I'll jump into the topic, which I think is a very timely one. I mean, just some clarifications. I'm not an AI expert. I don't know much about the technical side. I cannot explain much about the technical side of things, but yesterday we discussed a lot of the practical sides of it, and today I'll try to dive into the broader impacts of AI. What does it mean for social science research and society at large? In particular, I had this idea, of course, in conversation with Josh, as we were both witnessing the breakthroughs, the advancements in generative AI in the last few months, which, in just a few months, we've seen a pace of innovation that has exceeded everyone's expectations. So generative AI is a subset of AI, basically, just to clarify, which is not only capable to recognize and analyze large amount of data, but also to generate new data, new content, be it in textual, visual, audiovisual format. It has been around for some time. There was something that was called GPT-3 Playground by OpenAI, which was, I think, launched in 2020. And then last year, towards the end of the last year, we saw first the failed launch of Meta's Galactica, a large language model, which was advertised as a helping tool for scientists, which then helped scientists to tear it apart, because of course, at this day and age, still the large language models, despite their magnificent features, have a lot of limitations. But then less than 2 weeks after, OpenAI launched ChatGPT, which was then advertised as a generative AI for the masses, which then helped go viral and survive some of the harsh criticisms by scientists. And in just the less than 3.5 months since then, we have seen a major investments from Microsoft in OpenAI, which then leads to inclusion of GPT 3.5 and now GPT 4 technologies into Microsoft products, such as the Bing browser, or as we had announcement yesterday, the Microsoft Office packages, right? So this is something that will be there for everyone. It's not something that's is reserved just for the geeks and the nerds and people who are into such things, but it's going to be massively spread and diffuse technology. And then Google also announced that in its own work suites, like Gmail, Google Documents, they will integrate their own large language model very soon. It's already going, but it's going to unveil in phases. And these are actually all developments in the last few days. Just as OpenAI was announcing the mass release of GPT-4. So it's a lot going on. It's hard to catch up with these things, but it's changing the world as we speak. Yesterday, we had this seminar with the doctoral students where we talked about some of the practical stuff. So we demonstrated some tools that can help in different stages of research, from using some platforms that have AI components in them as second brain, where they would plan their projects and collect their notes and data, to literature scoping and literature review in an advanced way that by far exceeds the capacities of Google Scholar and Semantic Scholar, to writing processors that can help out with different parts of the writing, from formulating sentences to formulating titles, breaking up the text in different paragraphs and so on, to proofreading and editing language but also argumentation. And of course, that's everything else aside from chatbots. We also discussed chatbots, but not how you can use to generate content, which I still consider to be not the best way to use them, or probably a risky way to use them, but as a way to, brainstorm ideas, get ideas for follow-up arguments, counter arguments, and so on. And it was a nice discussion. Of course, I'm not, there are people who I cited in that presentation who are much better versed in these things than me. I'm also learning a lot. But my point has been that it's better to be at the early, to be among the early adopters of this innovation rather than to be a laggard. And I said that, that part, the practical part yesterday was imbued with some, let's say, tactical optimism or tactical enthusiasm. So on the short term, we should all learn these things. But today I want to contrast that with the strategic, well, pessimism would be too much to say, but let's say cautiousness or wariness about where these things are going, where we are going as researchers, but also as humans. And my cautiousness, pessimism is not so much related to AI as technology itself, but rather to the human intelligence and what humans can make or will make out of it. Of course, a lot of it is due to the present context, wars, crisis, uncertainty, which shows that given that we already have some very powerful technologies, we haven't been able to use them to overcome some inherent, how to put it, constraints of society and our creative potential. But I'll try to first focus actually on what we do as social scientists and as scholars, as researchers, and maybe we have some PhD students as well with us. So, and I'll try to point, I try to raise some questions, point out to some contradictions that I can sense, especially on the short to medium term in the future. And right off the bat, I won't discuss that much ethical stuff. So I won't discuss research ethics. I will assume that people will use AI ethically, right? Even though there is a huge discussion on that, and I wouldn't focus on the discussion on the limits or the omnipotence of AI. I would assume that AI will be powerful to some extent, but that humans will try to use it optimally, right? So this is just to put those issues for another debate. So I will look at AI as a tool, right? As an instrument, and in some historical context, as a tool that would probably impact our world at the same scale as in the ancient world, probably the invention of geometry or numbers, or let's say later on does it count as Middle Ages, the invention after Middle Ages, the invention of the printing press, or in the modern ages, the invention of the computer, calculator, the internet, that kind of disruptive or radical innovation. With the important caveat that with AI, there is something substantially different, which is why these lessons from the past can have only limited applicability, and that substantial difference is that generative AI can learn and improve just like other subsets of AI, but also it can create new content that is indistinguishable from human content. And other factors that should be taken in consideration, this thing costs money, and most of these technologies are owned by big corporations. So we just mentioned Microsoft, Google, and so on. They're not too expensive, right, for someone from a developing country, from a developed country, but from the developing countries, it can look differently. Not everyone has those $100 per year for a chatbot and so on. Another thing, this is a technology that is very much reliant on actually physical infrastructure, which is, aside from good internet, actually requires computational capacity, which then requires electricity and can have also environmental impact if it scales up. I mean, we've seen what happening with cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin servers. It's a sustainability issue, actually. So it's something that I will also want to touch upon, but is very specific to this historical moment. So let's go straight to the first point that I want to make about the impact of generative AI in the knowledge production process in social sciences as well beyond, but we're social scientists, so let's stick to that. It can help speed up research and publication. This is already true. Like with the current state of AI, it already speeds up the process immensely. It cuts down a lot of small pesky things. Already digital innovations have done so, but with AI now, many other things are happening. Like it cuts down the need for interview transcripts. Actually, as I speak, I'm doing an experiment. I'm being recorded by an AI app, which generates my speech in textual form in real time. I'll later use another AI to turn that speech into bullet points, and then another AI to turn it automatically in a presentation. I don't know what will be the output, but these are things that would have not taken me too much, cognitive potential, right? It's a very automatic, but also very boring thing to do, and something that I would probably delay for days and maybe forget to do, and then we'll see how it goes. I don't promise anything. Right, but it can automate these things, right? So, and in terms of the substance of the research, it really helps out with first drafts, right? So I can use what I do now as a first draft of a paper or a speech, right? And if I use those more advanced tools, I can immediately also find good references and help fix the language. So I can get this speech into a paper much sooner than it would have been done the old way, right? And this is just one tiny example. So it's never been easier to write a paper. I don't know if it's never been easier to write a good paper, but I come to that in a second. In general, I think this is a democratizing effect if done better, in a sense that should these tools be available to more people, especially people who don't have access to someone to transcribe their audio, to the people who don't have access to someone help them with finding the right sources or collect some data that could be done with AI, it empowers them in some sense. In terms of language, I mean, aside from, of course, there is this threat of English language imperialism because most of these things are in English. We saw yesterday that actually a lot of these language models are trained also on other languages. So paradoxically, it can both help people who are not native English speakers speak better English, write better English, but it can also help, produce or advance production in some smaller languages. It's yet to be seen, let's say, how it works with endangered languages. Either way, quality, another important discussion. My assumption is that actually top research will remain top research. I don't see the potential for any top researcher being entrapped by or seduced by these new technologies and then somehow losing their edge. I think it may help facilitate some parts, but even if top researchers do not care much about AI, they will remain top researchers. I see actually a paradoxical development, and I'll say later why it's paradoxical, in improving bad or mediocre research to reach certain level of quality that can be then passed on, as good research, that can become more visible, be more solid in a sense. I'll come back to this point later. The big discussion we all had yesterday is, does this make on average people, or researchers in particular, lazier? I wouldn't use the term lazy. There's probably the term, the concept of complacency is much more applicable, and it's likely that they will also unlearn some stuff the more rely on some tasks on AI. However, as I had this discussion with George, my assumption is that just like people, at some point unlearned how to hunt or survive in the forest, or later on we unlearned how to do math by hand because we have calculators, computers. This will not be a fatal kind of unlearning. We'll just focus on other things. So whether this will be more creative, more innovative things, it remains to be seen. But I wouldn't panic so much about that. Now, the consequences of this. There is and I would directly link this to, publish or perish, or perishing by publishing too much. Depends how you want to put it, right? I don't want to be a journal editor. Not that I had any invitation. But even if I have, I would reject it, especially now. I've seen data. So we all seen data on the exponential number of journal submissions, publications, the more and more journals opening, and more papers being published per researcher as the number of researchers is increasing in the world. I haven't seen data on the past few months that could explain or refer to the impact of AI at this stage, but I've seen some data on submissions to, let's say, literary journals, magazines, which is off the charts, just in the few months since this generative AI has been released. And we also know, there is a concern that much of the literature produced in academia is not being read. There is risk of burnout, mental health issues, physical health suffering at an unprecedented level. So this is the point where I get pessimistic and scared, because on one hand, optimistically speaking, AI can make all these things easier, right? You can write papers faster, then you can use some extra time to make them better, but ultimately then you can take some time off and enjoy life. Because we're already at a high pace of productivity and expectations. But knowing how humans in our field behave, it is very easy to see that the race to the top or the race to the bottom, depends how you put it, is going to intensify. So expectations will raise. If you were expected to produce a good paper in a month or 2 months or 3 months, I don't know. Now you have all the tools, and it's a matter of time until someone says, okay, you can produce that paper in 2 weeks, right? If you were supposed as a administrator to write 100 emails per day, which is already a painful amount, now you have AI, you have to write 200 emails per day, because you can generate them with one click. Yeah, it's easier to do it, but then, the workload will rise. So I tend to see that this overproduction tendency will intensify, and due to, just structural reasons. This is not to blame on the AI, right? This is to blame on the humans. And the sad part of this trend, I think, would be that we will focus on AI as the new calculator or the new type machine without emphasizing enough where it could lead us in terms of the creative potentials to solve some problems that can be solved, or with conventional means, and so on. And the paradoxical development of this thing is that with the overproduction, actually already with the current overproduction, but now let's imagine a more intensified overproduction, the amount of literature produced by far exceeds the potential of any human or any team to digest. The only thing that can digest such literature is AI itself, right? So this is where we will fall into the trap. And already there are some actually AI applications. We didn't get to discuss them yesterday with the PhD students because I myself haven't had a chance to explore them enough, but there are already customized applications where you can actually put in 100 PDFs and ask the AI to find common, like not to code them, but probably soon they'll be able to code them, but to digest main arguments or find common tropes and so on. So this is probably part of the future. And for a moment, I would step outside academia. Academia, social science, probably the most conservative field when it comes to AI. Like, people are generally techno-skeptical of the capacities. They're concerned about the ethics. In general, it will take some time until this becomes mainstream and accepted. I am aware that, you know, some people from some other institutions, I know, may be really outraged by the things I'm saying here. I mean, I keep on seeing those posts all the time on LinkedIn, on Twitter. But in other fields of creative work, AI is already the big thing. You know, copywriters, journalists, audiovisual media producers, they are now relying on AI, and they're happy to see these innovations that help them produce faster, produce more, and fast track the process. So this then raises the question, you know, at the current stage, all these large language models, all the AI is learning from human-generated content, and is developing its knowledge, its understanding, and gives back us the results based on its analysis of human-generated content. But already we may very soon witness AI that learns on a hybrid human AI-generated content, and then the next stage would be AI learning from predominantly AI-generated content, right? I have to credit a friend of mine, a philosopher, architect, who had this discussion, Jordan Shishevsky, who is very interested in this paradox, AI learning from AI-generated materials. Going back to academia, how does this affect how we communicate our ideas, research? I mean, I have to also cite another friend of mine who's actually electrical engineer, who is into scanning, you know, MRI scanning, and he does, you know, bio and cognitive scanning stuff in Montreal, Nicolas Tikov, who actually wrote a very intriguing post, was called "The End of the Academic Paper." Said, and it's very easy from the perspective of natural sciences. I mean, they don't see text as that necessary. They're interested in the experiment, the data. So basically getting rid of the unnecessary prose, right? This is the next stage according to that perspective. I think I myself, and I can see maybe others being even more triggered from the perspective of social sciences and humanities, in the sense that narrative is a very big part of what we do. Like, it's not the same like in the natural sciences. So how to proceed forward? To proceed forward, I think, at least in the social sciences, where we have an obvious competitive advantage, right, to the AI, is still, at least, our capacity to see the world as it is. We can tell what's real and what's not, and I'm happy we don't have philosophers in the room, because this would be then another discussion. But let's say, in a very simplistic terms, we can see what's real, what's not. We can tell truth from a lie. Again, very conditionally said. But these concepts are currently still not graspable by artificial intelligence. And I guess our eyes and ears and ability to interact with the real world, this is we have to see how this, I mean, something that we have taken for granted, but now is our actually, we have to emphasize how this can be then used in the world, which we're going to be seeing much and a greater role of AI. And finally, I want to tease out one idea, you know, that relativizes what I just said, our capacity to see reality and so on. Because, I mean, all these discussions are what we see on the horizon right now. And I don't think anyone can see what's beyond. Like, we're really in an uncharted territory here. But I'm always intrigued when I think about generative AI, about its potential effects on, let's say, intersubjectivity. On a macro, micro, and even like individual level, seeing things from different perspectives. And this again goes beyond social science academia, but has a very important, you know, it's very relevant for us. So generative AI creates the opportunity to fast track the production of all sorts of outputs, right? Books, movies, You know, as a father, I always think of, you know, now I have the possibility to create custom textbooks or like, you know, children books for my son, which I could use just a few prompts to generate the artwork, to generate the story, right? I don't need any special skills for that, right? And then, you know, if you see actually the potential uses of AI beyond just creativity, in that sense, in terms of cultural output, cultural artifacts, it's omnipresent. Like one of the intended uses of GPT-4 is to literally take a photo of you take a photo of your fridge, the AI identifies the ingredients in your fridge and gives you 5 potential recipes that you can cook. So yeah, I mean, so it replaces not just, you know, these pesky little tasks that we do, but some actually very core human components in our reasoning, our creation, and our interaction. You know, I cannot keep on questioning myself on an individual level, especially, let's say, these new generations, right? They will be growing up in a world increasingly where they will interact with chatbots. With individualized and customized cultural outputs, right? That will differ on individual level, right? Every kid will have their own movie, in a sense, tailored according to their liking or their parents' liking, whatever. This will have reflections in education. Potentially, you know, we can actually try later to see if we can create a new artificial language that one day maybe you and your chatbot will speak, but no one else in the world will speak. In terms of human interaction, what this means, establishing common grounds, in a sense, understanding each other should not be taken for granted. Like, it's something that we now assume that we can talk to people. Maybe in the future we'll need an AI translator or mediator to talk to other people. And on a macro level, you know, of course, you know, there's always this libertarian tendency to say, oh, this can lead to decentralization, independence, you know, empower people and so on. I tend to see value in part of that reasoning, but, you know, at what point is decentralization becomes fragmentation and, you know, bifurcation of social fabric. I mean, I don't want to sound moralistic or panic, right? I try to see these things objectively as much as I can. But then what's objective, what's real, what's not, in such a world where most of the stuff will be us talking to chatbots. Today, already, clothing companies or other companies can hire non-existing AI-generated models to model their clothes, right? Will we be able in the future to have artificially generated respondents, you know? What happens, you know, once you bring in the perspectives, I don't know, business folks, philosophers, security folks? It's I would conclude here, you know, I would conclude with these questions. That's about it for my reflections. I'm happy to keep the time. I said I'm not good, but I'm right at the 30 minutes mark.